Hello and welcome to the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Owain. I'm joined by Dan. How's it going, Dan?
Yeah, good, thanks. Back into training, full training, ready for London Marathon off the back of Seville. So that's when I'm my happiest, doing lots of miles, 37K day today, double threshold. Might talk about those session details in a bit later in the episode as an example. But yeah, doing well, doing
You're
well.
fresh
How
off
about yourself?
fresh off a Centre Parks training camp as well.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. It's a camp of no sleep, lots of hills, swimming every day. Yeah, it was my perfect dream elite athlete setup. Yeah,
The
definitely.
swimming sounds good.
Well, I wasn't really swimming; it was floating,
Yeah.
making sure Nye doesn't drown. But yeah, I
Was that
hate
like
swimming.
a hot tub or a sauna or anything?
Uh, there was an outdoor pool which was quite warm. That was pleasant. But then
Not sh-
Nye just wanted to hang out in the shallows. It's for getting out, for getting in, for drying yourself off. You just get cold. I get cold. And once I'm cold for hours. And then you've also gone in and get a 4-year-old undressed, dressed, changed, feed him because they always come out and they're just incredibly hungry. It's a bit of a stressful experience, to be honest.
Yeah, not something I've experienced yet.
Yeah, your time will come. Don't worry. Don't worry. How are you going?
Yeah,
I
good.
feel like I haven't seen. Normally,
I
I get a
know.
full recap of your week every week, but now we're not recording the same Patreon shows together. And I've got to listen to you and Jen talk, so we don't get this connection every quite as often.
Yeah, and I was just listening to you and Jake earlier. I was just telling you before we started recording. I mean, that's our plug for Patreon, right? We listen to each other's training weeks now. You can listen to on our Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. Um, yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, I had a few good weeks. Yeah, I think the mileage caught up to me last week. A bit of a bit of mileage, a bit of maybe life stress on Wednesday, and I just ate everything I could possibly eat, and then I felt all right after that. So yeah, definitely feeling like I could probably run more. Like if I had less going on in my life, I could run more just by eating more. I think that's definitely the secret. Just eat an obscene amount.
Carbs are the secret. I think carbs have been outside of super shoes, carbs are the biggest game changer over the last few years, I would say. I definitely used to, not intentionally, but I was not fueling enough for the amount of training I was doing. And being more on it has allowed me to do a lot more training. And at the minute, I'm in the perfect spot and I'm quite well rested because I've had a pretty easy last couple of weeks. I'm super motivated, so I can just go out and do loads of training. And it hasn't caught up with me yet. Give me another week and I'll be in a bin probably. But
Yeah,
less of a bin if I eat enough carbs.
give it a week and another illness coming home from school.
Well, I tell you what, I don't know how I managed to pull it off, but yeah, Centre Parks. We were there with one of Nye's cousins, Jemima's sister, and her partner. We'll get home safely on the Saturday. Get a message. Oh yeah, the two kids are ill. Nye's cousins. Yeah, of course. Nye gets ill later in the day. Jemima gets ill. And that was like 3 or 4 days ago now, and I haven't caught anything. And that never happens. I don't know if it's because I've just not been hammering myself in training or what, but normally Jemima's indestructible. You know, she works in the NHS. She's been on respiratory wards. She's worked through a pandemic. She's immune to pretty much everything. And me and Nye always get it. Whereas this time, I've touch wood, escaped. Keep
Touch a lot
thinking
of
this
wood.
is the day, but I think I'm in the clear now because they're basically well, and I still have been fine.
I'll check in with you tomorrow morning.
Check in with me tomorrow morning, yeah. But I got through 37K running today, and I'm still in one piece, and it went pretty well. So I
Yeah,
think I'm in the clear.
yeah. And I guess just one more plug for our Patreon. Although I think you made this available for everyone, but Dan has a spreadsheet with his training plan on there, so you can hold him accountable. I haven't seen any comments yet saying this wasn't on the spreadsheet, so
I
I
had my
think
first deviation today. Actually,
okay.
I added a little bit more. I did an extra set of my 200s. I did in the evening, but it was a new session. In my defense, it's a new session. I'm learning my limits and felt actually 3 sets of 10 200s was quite manageable. I can do another set here, and got throughout this evening. But yeah, it's freely available. You can sign up for free on Patreon, and we try and put some stuff up there which is freely available for everyone. And one of those bits is my training plan in the build up to London, how I'm trying to take on my 3rd marathon in 20 weeks. And yeah, a few changes. You've got to make some changes and try some new things to keep making progress when you've been running marathons as long as I have. So I've got a few little experiments in there, like calculated risks, I would say. Calculated risks. Try to take that evidence-based approach, but at the same time, keep driving adaptations. So if you want to take a look, and like Owain said, jump into my Strava and comment when I'm not following the plan, then please feel free to do so. But so far, if I was on Training Peaks, I'd be all green.
That's what you're looking for, the green ticks.
Yeah.
Cool. And as always, we're sponsored by Soar. You've had some new kit, right? Do you want to talk through?
Yeah, I mean, we had a kit drop. What was it, a couple of weeks ago now? And one of the things that I requested and was very kindly given was the advanced race shorts, because I've got the basically what I've got all the marathon shorts with all the pockets in, and they're great, really good, like perfect for racing marathons. But I wanted something a bit lighter, a bit sleeker. Didn't I feel like I was out for a marathon for when I'm doing either treadmill sessions or actually I'm racing, which I haven't done for a while now, a shorter distance race like a 5k, 10k. I don't need pockets and to put gels in, etc. And these are super, super nice. They're so lightweight. Instead of having like a drawstring, they've just got an elasticated waistband, and that takes out a lot of the weight. Really breathable, really, really comfortable. I've been stress testing them on the treadmill outside, and it's one of those ones where as soon as it's out of the wash, it's just back on for the next run, because it's just such a nice feeling, super comfy. So definitely would recommend going to check them out. They've I think it's on the new arrivals section of the Soar website, so it must have come out pretty recently. But yeah, there's a few other bits in this graphene section as well, which look very nice. This vest I'm eyeing up here, I've got up on my screen. That's definitely going on my next order list, I've got to say.
Yeah. As always with Soar, the designs are really cool, aren't they? I'm curious to see what the graphene stuff feels like as well. Because I mean, like, if you're in the UK now, you've definitely seen a Soar club vest, right? And they're crazy light. I think a lot of club runners will have seen the advanced from the classic like, you know, Ron Hill or Wasp club vest to a Soar vest is pretty game changing already. So yeah, I'm curious to see how lightweight the graphene vests are. But yeah, definitely check out Soar, especially as it's actually starting to get a little bit warmer. I've been out in shorts a few times recently. So it's definitely time to start thinking about what you're going to wear when the sun actually appears. So yeah, check out Soar. They're always big supporters of ours. We really, really, really love their kit. Thank you as always, Soar.
Yeah, thank you. So we better get into what we're actually going to talk about today, which is one that's been requested quite heavily off the back of our last series on the intensity domains and training zones, which is basically give us some examples of the sessions that you would do. So we're going to do a whole episode today on we'll give you some examples, but hopefully give you the knowledge to be able to design your own sessions based upon best practice and principles. So what's recovery periods, what interval durations should you be using to try and trigger different adaptations? So for an easy run, that's pretty straightforward. But what should you be thinking about when you're designing the length and intensity of your easy runs? For your threshold sessions, what recovery should you be using? What rep length should you be using? And probably more important for the VO2 max type heavy severe intensity domain, extreme intensity domain sessions. That's where I think a lot of people get it wrong, and actually just by not designing the session properly, you can not completely ruin the stimulus, but you're just not getting what you think you're getting out of that session. I'm a classic, but I've moaned about on this show all the time, is 10 by 400s off a minute, and people go, this is VO2 max work. And I'll talk through that again later, but that's just not a VO2 max session in terms of that's not the best way to improve your VO2 max based upon the literature and what we see in training as well. So that's the flavor of today. How do you go about optimizing and designing sessions that are actually going to give you what you want? But to start with, we're just going to discuss, probably even before we get to that, how do you go about structuring your week? Where should you be putting different sessions? And what sessions should you be doing for the goals that you've got effectively? Is that a good intro? Is that a starting
I think so.
point?
Yeah. I think we sort of made notes on the different sessions, but I sort of said like take it back a step and like your Sunday night you're planning out your week, or you doing your spreadsheet on the plane back from Seville. Thinking about each week and just thinking from that like slightly higher level of like what are you trying to achieve each week, and then how do the sessions contribute to that, I think is the starting point, isn't it? Because you probably don't want to get to literally being at the track or where you do a session and thinking like, oh, okay, what am I doing? Like that's not gonna lead to long-term progress, is it? Just
No,
thinking like
definitely
that.
not. Definitely not. And I think like the starting point when you're thinking about your week is definitely where the hard session's going and what those hard sessions look like. And that's what we were saying before we started recording. But for both of us, that is the starting point. That probably dictates what the rest of the week's going to look like in terms of easy running, long runs, etc. So I guess there's some practical elements to that in terms of you probably need a bit more time for the harder sessions. Also, for some people, that might mean that some days if you're in the countryside, for example, it's dark in the evenings, you can't go and do hard sessions at that period of time in the UK. Maybe you are limited to doing your session on a Saturday, for example. So I think firstly, it's a practical standpoint of what time have you got available? Where can you actually do a hard session? Would you say, Owain? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think exactly. I talked about it plenty on the Valencia series, right? Like, I was doing one session during the week and then a Sunday session as part of the long run, and we can get onto that when we talk about session design in terms of maybe mixing it in with the long run. But I had the choice of Wednesday or Thursday, and Thursday worked better logistically for me. In terms of partly not coming off of a podcast recording the night before and having quite a late night. And then I was just able to do slightly different hours of work on the Thursday. So that worked better. And there was a decision of, do I do it on Wednesday and probably have 10 to 15 minutes less like total time that I could do? Some of that would have come out of the warm up and the cool down, but some of that would have come out of the session. Or do I do it on Thursday where I have 15 more minutes to dedicate to it, and that's worth the change. At the same time, like if I'd been trying to fit 2 sessions in during the week, it would have made it harder. That's where I guess I'm lucky enough, like I can get up a bit earlier. Obviously some people can't do that because of like life or because actually when they start work, like there's a point where getting up early is
Exactly. That's my barrier. Jemima's got to leave for work at 7:30, so I've got to be home by 7:30 at the latest. So that means doing a session in the morning is tricky a lot of the time. So you've got the practical things, but then it's more about, well, you need to space it out so you've got proper recovery. Doing a session on a Friday and then doing a session on a Saturday obviously isn't the most isn't the smartest decision, because you want to spread out the stress. Otherwise, it just becomes a big injury risk, and you're not going to absorb all of that response. I would say you're just going to get a lot of fatigue and probably not maximize your stimulus. You're going to get a better response if you spread those sessions out. And then the harder the session, the more recovery time you need as well. So if you're doing a big marathon specific session on the Sunday, then heading down to the track for your club night on the Tuesday probably isn't the smartest thing. You probably want to make it on a Wednesday or Thursday to really make sure you've got that recovery window.
Yeah, I was going to say like maybe I don't know, maybe it's just going to become a theme for this episode, but like mistakes you see people making, And that's definitely one is, my club trains on a Tuesday, but then the only other day I can do a session is a Wednesday. So I'm just gonna do both. And that's like, just pick one, like just take one and just, jog the other one. You're not going to get any less fit. I think that's it's definitely always it's something I say a lot to the people I coach, is like, you're not going to lose fitness by jogging. So it's better to do one quality session a week than two where the second one is heavily compromised. In terms of the benefit you're going to get from the session, and the massive increase in risk of injury that you're going to be sort of playing with doing that as well.
Yeah, and I think in situations like that where you have to be a bit creative, because I think doing one session a week is most people need more than one session a week if they've been running for a while to really see gains. But then you go, well, actually, I go and run an hour and a half on a Sunday. I've got time there. Let's put some intensity into that, and that becomes a second session. It doesn't. You don't need to be training for a marathon to make your long runs a bit more quality, or give some more quality to the long runs. So yeah, like, you've got all this life juggling, which does become tricky, and that's obviously going to be a big part of it for most people, because unfortunately, very few people are professional runners who can just dedicate their whole life to running. But outside of that, then, so you've found where you're going to do your quality days in a week, and it's deciding what is that quality going to look like.
Yeah, and I guess still talking at this like higher level, like, in terms of how the week's going to look, it's days that you can fit it in, and the priorities of that quality, or how you want that to sort of look at that that higher level before you decide on the rep length and the intensity. So I think for us, a lot of that is just going to be work between LT1 and LT2. That's probably for like 40 to 45 of the weeks of the year, like, most of our sessions are going to be in that intensity, right? So it's really not that big a sort of thought process, at least for me. It's like, okay, my week dictates that I can do, an hour and 15 sort of worth of work in that range. How am I going to divvy it up in a session? But there will be weeks where we've talked about, like, adding in severe intensity domain sessions, like maybe 10 days before 5k you want to add some more in. That's going to slightly change that week, or you're coming off of a race and it's going to slightly change. But generally, like, it's probably going to be fairly similar. But deciding how long each week you want to sort of do as intense work and what zone.
Yeah, I mean, we're very heavy on the heavy domain threshold work, like LT1 to LT2, whatever you want to call it. Tempo running, I don't know, is that a good term? That's an awful term. No one knows what tempo running means. It just means what you want it to mean. And that's, I think, for me and most of the athletes I coach, that is a big, big part of their week most of the year, regardless of what they're training for. But I would say that the base phase, which is by definition most of the year, because you're not peaking to race. I guess if you're a track athlete, you're racing a lot in the summer, but when you're not in that summer competition phase, most of my athletes anyway are doing threshold work twice a week. And that is certainly my starting point. And then they might get to do some physiology testing, and they go, actually, your VO2 max might be the thing that's limiting you. And then I will add in carefully a bit more intensity in the program to help drive that. But I think it's having a purpose for why you're doing the sessions. And threshold is great just because you can do quite a high volume of work and get some benefit, but it's also really safe in terms of risk. And it's popular at the minute. But a lot of people, for example, like Keely Hodgkinson, who's smashing it at the minute, running 154 for 800, I know that her program has got loads of intensity in there. Jake Whiteman, again, is another one of his athletes who uses more intensity. So I don't think threshold is the only way to do it, but I think there at least needs to be a rationale for why you're doing those sessions. And if you're not putting that thought process into why you're doing it, you just go into the track and running hard, then maybe you're not optimizing what you need to be doing. Having just at least a systematic approach to it and going, right, this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be working in this zone. And it's deliberate, I guess, rather than just turning up at a track and seeing what you fancy doing.
Yeah, and I think we then also like briefly discussed before we hit record, like, yeah, so most of the stuff we're going to be doing is between LT1 and LT2, but that can take actually some really different shapes. Like you just said you did 200s tonight, but then you could also go and do like 3x4 miles, and it's still going to be in the same zone, but there's massive differences in those sessions. And I think maybe at least in terms of the sort of higher level, like planning your week, that's where you're considering, maybe, I don't know if there's a good term for it, but the sort of specificity sort of beyond just the intensity of the session. So that's where I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, this athlete's 8 weeks out from a marathon now, and we want to work on their durability. So yeah, they're still going to do 45, 50 minutes between LT1 and LT2, but the reps are just going to be slightly longer, or there might be like a slightly longer warm up going into it, just to sort of be running those intensities, having accumulated a bit more work across a session. Or yeah, maybe you're doing a hilly race, maybe you're doing something like Boston, and you're still going to do the whole session at the same intensity, but you're going to do it over some hills just to get a slight bit more specificity. And maybe you want to get some eccentric loading on some downhills. So you're going to do 6x6 minutes, but it's going to be on some hilly roads, just to get that like little sort of, it's almost, I don't know, it's like the flavoring in like a meal, right? Like it's not the bulk of it. The bulk of it is that time in that zone, but you're just adding this little like little twist to it to get that specificity. And I think maybe some people approach it with those being the main thing, like, oh, I'm doing Boston, so I need to do loads of hills. But actually the underlying training is still going to be fairly similar. It's just you're adding this like twist to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. I mean, a classic example from me and my coaching is that if an athlete is getting ready for a 10K, then, or a 5K even, before I do specific stuff, I'm going to get them doing the classic 20 to 25 times 400 off 30 seconds rest in that threshold intensity, because you can now run at 10K race pace, but with a very low metabolic cost. Their lactate can still be nicely controlled. Their heart rate is going to be below their LT2 heart rate. But they're getting those neuromuscular stimulus, which is much closer to race pace, or actually matches race pace. So that's sort of a transition towards then doing more classic work like 6 by a mile at 10K race pace with 2 minutes rest.
Yeah. There's loads of ways to approach, right? But I think having this, like, stepping back and taking this view at the start of every week, or a few weeks in advance, it almost like gives you the answer then, doesn't it? Almost, yeah, when you step back and think about it, it then makes a task that for a lot of people can be quite daunting, of how do I do my own training, actually sort of all fits together. I think at least a bit easier. Then you still have to think about how you're going to actually achieve that, but I think it points you in the direction of the answer a lot easier than just sitting there on Sunday night and thinking like, oh no, what do I do this week? And not really having any sort of idea. I think it all fits in with, like, like we always reference the performance planning podcast, don't we? Like, it all references that, like, the thought with this thinking, before the start of your week is, how does this get me to my goal race? Or how does this help me achieve that goal at that goal race? And yeah, whether that's session design, or whether that's, do I go race this park run on Saturday? Like, they're all coming from the same sort of starting point of, how does this impact my goal race?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's the introduction really to then talking about in more detail the specific sessions, because I think you need to at least appreciate, you can't look at it in isolation. One session in isolation is not going to make or break your week, month, year. It needs to be in that bigger context. But then once you've got that background, you also need to be doing good sessions and consistent sessions, but giving you what you want to achieve. So let's move on then to talking about the different I've gone through it in terms of intensity domains. So although we've said intensity is the most important thing, and like the quality session is most important, I've started with the easy running just because I think logically we're going to sort of work through the intensity domains. And if we did it in reverse, then it would be extreme intensity domain, and not that is actually less important, I think, than the easy running. In terms of importance, easy running is making up almost all of your training, and it's probably giving you the biggest benefits just because you're doing much more of it versus the intensity. You can't do intensity every day. We all know that just from our own experiences of trying that. So moderate intensity sessions, and by that I mean your easy runs, your zone 2, your zone 1s, whatever you want to call it. If we tag zone 2 in it, we'll get loads of likes, so we'll talk about zone 2, shall we, in this episode. And obviously the goal there of the easy running, we talked about it for the whole podcast on it for a few weeks ago now, isn't it, on zone 2, is effectively to drive like low level signaling adaptations, but with very little cost to it, or not no cost, but it obviously doesn't take as much out of you as those harder days. And it's also very risk-free in terms of injury, overtraining, etc. Obviously you can take this to an extreme and do too much easy running, but most people aren't getting injured from their easy running in general. So then we're going to talk through it in terms of what intensity should you actually be running at, and then the duration of those easy runs. Like, how do you come up with how far am I going to run today on my easy day?
Yeah.
Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, we're approaching it this way. I think when you actually come to putting your week together, you maybe go with the intensity first. So I think that's actually going to drive some of the easy running in terms of the day before and the day after the session. How does that impact your easy running? And I guess also maybe to say that all of this isn't something that you need to get right, like from week one. It's something you learn and something that changes over time. The easy running that you can manage at the start of, even just in isolation, a marathon block changes across the block. So that's to say as well, this isn't a black and white answer at the start. And it's something that would change, and also something that would change during the week based on like life stress and what's going on in your life, what's going on, even like weather-wise, right? But yeah, so I guess I would be thinking, how does this fit around the sessions? So if you tend to find that you pull up, maybe not necessarily sore, but like just a bit fatigued the day after a session, then maybe your easy run that day is a bit less than I don't want to say normal, but that you would like, if you're thinking like, okay, 60 minutes is the goal, maybe it's just 50 minutes on the day after a session, because that actually allows you to keep doing the sessions consistently for 12 weeks, which is probably the better outcome than doing an extra 10 minutes for a few weeks. And then in terms of intensity, I was going to say as well, like below LT1, but I'd say quite far below LT1. Like the thing that we keep mentioning when we talk about the intensity for easy running, like I say, is you should be able to take in all of your surroundings, and like we said with the traffic lights, not feel like you have to stop at a set of traffic lights.
Or getting frustrated that you've got to stop rather than appreciating the rest. If you're appreciating the rest, I would say you're probably running too hard on your easy days.
Yeah. In terms of duration, I found with coaching, like at least at the start, having quite a big window and just sort of trusting that if you're running at the right intensity, you'll probably also quite instinctively find the right duration for you as well. In terms of if you set out on a really nice, like gentle plod, and assuming the weather's okay, it's not like awful weather that you just want to get back inside, you'll probably know, like after a few weeks, okay, like, I'm feeling like 40 minutes today. So that's what I'll do. And that's probably as good a guide as any for the duration. Or you're feeling really good and really enjoying it. So 60 minutes. I think, with an upper cap of probably 60, 65, 70 minutes, like you probably quite instinctively know how much what you can do if you're running at the right intensity, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the most important stuff with the easy days is it doesn't compromise the hard days, because you need to do both. You need volume and intensity in there. And the danger of doing too much mileage is that then you just can't do the quality or absorb the quality on your hard days. So that's definitely something to take into account. At the same time, there's probably a minimum dose that you need to really get a benefit. And I was teasing Jen and I a whole of her Valencia block that 30-minute runs aren't going to do anything for her. She's running 100 miles a week. She's been training for 15 years. A 30-minute run probably isn't long enough to really drive a stimulus and adaptation. At the same time, going out and doing 2-hour easy runs every day is going to take a lot out of her and is going to compromise the quality of her hard days and probably increase that injury risk and fatigue and all of that stuff, just the sustainability of training. So it is finding that sweet spot. And over time, you will find where that level sits for you, but that would also be dynamic. Like you said, Owain, I can now go out and do 70 minutes in the morning and 50 minutes in the afternoon. And I can do that the day after a hard session. I can do it the day before a hard session. And that feels not like I'm doing nothing, but it's achievable. And I can do that week on week. Whereas if I tried to do that 5 years ago, that really would start affecting the quality of my sessions. And I wouldn't be able to just stack those good weeks together. So it's a little bit of self-experimentation. I generally think that unless you're really new to running, a 30-minute run in isolation is probably not going to do that much. And then even if you look at what elite athletes are doing, they're not normally running for more than 70 to 80 minutes in a single run outside of their long run. There are probably a few examples, but most people, once they get to the 70-minute mark, that's when they transition to do double running, and they might do that 70 minutes, 50 minutes sort of split. And that's pretty much the peak what you see. You don't see, even the best of the best aren't doing much more than that. Again, there's always going to be examples, like you look at the Japanese and stuff like that. They're well known for their huge total mileage. But I think a lot of it is just self-experimentation and starting off at a level where you know you can execute your hard sessions and just do this week on week and then slowly add more over time. Even if you start out conservative, that's a better way than being too aggressive and finding out, actually, no, this is my limit here. I need to have a bit of time to recover, reset, and then start building back up again.
Yeah, agree. Should we move on? Should we move up a domain?
Yeah, let's move up a domain. It starts getting a bit more interesting, I think, as we move up the domains.
I mean, this is probably going to be the big one.
Then, yeah. I've just had a monologue, so you kick us off again.
Yeah. So heavy domain, just as a reminder, this is above LT1 and below LT2. So yeah, for both of us, a lot of the sort of sessions, a lot of the quality work that isn't easy running is going to be in here. I mean, like, it's going to be all easy running or work in here 40 to 45 weeks of the year. Maybe with some, extra stuff that would probably be extreme domain. But most of it's going to be in this domain because you can do a lot of work and not encounter too big a metabolic cost during the session and like a recovery cost afterwards. So it just means you can accumulate a lot more work than you could if you went into the severe domain. And that's accumulating a lot more work again over a number of weeks. There's plenty of studies where they have people do 3 severe intensity domain sessions a week for a few weeks, but they experience burnout and like their numbers, at least during like the experiments, don't necessarily go down, but all the participants are all completely burnt out. So in reality, you can't do that, whereas you can get away with that in the heavy domain, which is why we bias it quite a lot. Maybe per unit or per minute of intensity, the severe domain gives a better response. Like you can do so much more heavy domain work that it outweighs that, I think. And then I guess so you've decided you want to accumulate a lot of time in the heavy domain. For us it's going to be like an hour to maybe 2 hours a week. maybe a little bit more if you're sort of double thresholding and then another session on the Saturday or Sunday. But that's, that's the sort of fringe, like Jakob Ingebrigtsen's, right, that are really routinely doing that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I would peak at. Yeah, not much over 2 hours. If you're looking at in terms of heart rate, I'd guess. And yeah, probably a few. If I'm doing a big marathon long run, I might get an hour and 20 minutes in that session, and by max. And then you do a double threshold, then yeah, maybe you get a little bit over 2 hours. But for most people, you're looking at less than that.
Yeah. So it's still a lot of work, but that's a lot less than your easy running. And then in terms of then actually planning a session, in our notes, you've put long and short reps. I'm gonna suggest that maybe there's a medium rep in this domain. So I reckon. So I agree on the short reps. So you can do threshold work below 3 minutes. And I guess actually the reason we're talking about dividing up the rep length is because in this domain you could be doing 3 by 4 miles, which is like one of your classic marathon sessions, right? You're going to be above LT1 doing that session, but the like absolute speed that you're running at when you're doing that 4 mile rep is going to be vastly different to what it's going to be if you're doing your 200s that you did tonight. So you're incurring the same metabolic cost, but there's quite a different sort of absolute, I guess output is probably the right word. I guess like if you were cycling, you'd be using watts, right? So you'd be using
speed, mechanical output, like muscle fiber recruitment is going to be very different across those two sessions. But if you look at the lactate in isolation and your heart rate as well, it's going to be quite similar. Yeah, I mean, I think of it as long reps and short reps. You could add a medium, but I'm not really a fan of the medium ones in terms of I've put short reps as under 3 minutes and long reps as over 3 minutes. But in reality, I don't do anything in that 75-second to 3 minute window. 3 minute reps I'd do. I think 2 minute reps just aren't. They're sort of a bit of nothing. But I think let's start with the longer reps then, which I've said are over 3 minutes. And obviously the longer the rep goes, the slower the speeds. But with these, and that's a really useful factor to play around with. We talked about it in the introduction. If I'm preparing for a shorter race distance, then I might select shorter rep ranges because I can just run at faster speeds for a similar metabolic cost. But classifying them as like 3 minute reps and longer, I do that because of the recoveries really, when you're talking about those reps, just don't matter. You tend to keep them short, but that's more just to stop people running too fast. In reality, because its intensity that is between LT1 and LT2, you could go and run a marathon and spend almost all of it in that LT1 to LT2 range without any recovery. So you could go and do a 10-mile tempo and speed at LT1 to LT2 and have no rest. So in theory, you basically don't need the rest when you're talking about the longer reps. Certainly like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes. But giving a rest psychologically makes it a bit easier and probably allows you to run just a little bit faster for the same metabolic cost. And maybe there's a recovery element there. You can get some fuel in, all of that sort of stuff. Just giving your muscles some respite helps you probably recover a bit better. I think anecdotally, I'd say that's true. But when it comes to the short reps, the recovery becomes a bit more important, not just to stop you running too fast, but also to shift the emphasis from more of an aerobic requirement versus an anaerobic glycolytic requirement. Do you want to go on from there, or am I just should I keep going?
No, I was going to say with the recoveries for the long reps, I think the recovery is as much maybe like a bit of a sort of mental reset between each rep. Like if you just went and did a 10-mile tempo every week, like you would just be so bored during the middle. Like I know that my pace would just drop because I'd just zone out and I'd just be bored and just probably wanting the session to finish. Whereas if you break that up into 10 by a mile, I'm gonna like there's at least a sort of reset every 6 minutes. So I think it's a mental reset. I think there's maybe also a bit of like musculoskeletal. I don't want to say reset because that's obviously not resetting, but yeah, where you're running a bit faster, I think you maybe do need that like slight break. But the way that I explain the intensity to the athletes I coach is that after 15 seconds doing those longer recoveries, like 15 seconds into the recovery, you should feel like you physically you could go again. And it might be that it's programmed for, a minute because you're doing, 6 by 6 minutes off a minute. But 15, 20 seconds in, you should feel like you're ready to go again. And by, the minute you should be, definitely like actually wanting to start running again. And that sort of speaks to the intensity, doesn't it, as well? Like, yeah, you wouldn't finish a severe intensity domain, a 5K pace. You wouldn't do, 5 by K. You're not thinking 15 seconds after that rep, oh, I'm good to go again.
No, I mean, my test, I think is, you don't necessarily need to do this, but can you just start the cool down as soon as that minute's up?
Yeah.
Or 30 seconds even. And classically, I'm always a bit pushed for time. And so I generally am cutting that recovery short. If I'm doing like 5 by 10 minutes off 90 seconds, well, 30 seconds into the last recovery, I've just gone. I've just started the cool down because I've got places to be. I want to get home. Yeah. I'm probably a bit cold. Just want to eat something. Whereas if you've really, and the other test is you can just go and run at your normal easy run pace, I would say as well. Maybe a little bit slower, but you're not feeling like I'm really just trudging along here. Just need to get to my house or to my car where I'm doing the session from.
Yeah, when I do these sessions on a treadmill, it's like finish the last rep, hit the stop button, off the treadmill, like back in the house to get my jogging shoes on to get out the door to jog because I need to like get going. Whereas if I was doing anything higher, you're just like, hanging onto the side of the treadmill, like just trying to get your breath. So yeah, that's normally my sign I've done the right intensity.
Yeah, I also like intervals versus just doing continuous stuff because it's just a bit safer. You can start out a bit more conservatively and build into it. And I know you can in a continuous run, but people don't. They just go out at a pace and try and hold that for as long as they can. There's just a bit more purpose. You can think about what you're doing in the recovery periods and go, right, was that the right intensity? Do I need to back off? Can I pick it up a bit? And it just, in a continuous run, you always just want to come out with the fastest average pace, don't you? And that's probably not the best way to think about it. Yeah. Long reps, I basically say recovery doesn't matter too much. Probably keep it reasonably short. A minute, 90 seconds. I pretty much give that a standard for everything. If it's 10-minute reps, I'll give 90 seconds. If it's 3-minute reps, I'm going to give a minute, somewhere in between for the reps in there. I guess the other thing you can do and make it a bit more marathon specific is you can also jog for recoveries or run at a pretty decent pace in recoveries because lactate isn't accumulating, or it shouldn't be accumulating if you're working in these zones. Then the recovery is, I'm not going to say it's optional because of all the reasons we've just discussed, but you can go and run as long as you're below LT1, you can be in that zone and recover and feel good. Yeah.
That's definitely a consideration as well, isn't it? Yeah, like what you're actually going to do during the recovery, and yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, if it's got that marathon and like durability bias, then at least jogging, if not trying to float the recovery, and that's maybe like session design. Yeah, maybe you do something where there's a lot more floats because you just want a sort of keeping your heart rate up across the whole session. And just accumulating a bit more work. You could do like 10 by a K off 30 seconds, or you could do 10 by a K with a K float. They're still doing the same sort of work period, but the float sort of adds to the total work of the session. And then like you said with the shorter reps, the recovery is controlling the metabolic response to the session a lot more than the longer reps, isn't it? It's actually absolutely. Maybe more an integral part of the session.
Definitely, because for shorter reps, you can run at a speed that is above your half marathon or hour, that hour race pace speed but because you're giving recoveries, that allows you to keep that metabolic control. So I said earlier, you can, like, often a session I'll give is 20 to 25 times 400 off 30 seconds rest, or 75 seconds I'll use if we're just using time. And people can generally run at about 10K race pace or a bit faster for that. And their lactate will be fine. Their heart rate will be nice and stable below VO2. So the recoveries there become important, but you don't want them super long either, because if they become too long, then what happens is that aerobic system just completely switches off. Your heart rate gets down to 100 beats per minute, and then you've got to rev that aerobic system back up again when you start the next rep. And that means that you're going to be more reliant on that glycolytic system. You're going to see higher lactates. You're not using as much, more of your energy is coming from the glycolytic system versus more of the aerobic system. Because when you see the heart rate trace to 25 by 400 or 30 seconds rest, it goes up at the start and you're going to see a little oscillation, some small oscillations in my heart rate, but almost all of that time is just going to be in my LT1 to LT2 heart rate range. Whereas if you give it off a minute, you don't see the same response. It goes, heart rate never gets that high because it's always starting from a really low level and you're only running for 75 seconds, give or take. And then it will just plateau again. So you're just relying more on that glycolytic system. So keeping recovery short is much more important. And I would generally say you're looking for a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. So if you're doing minutes, then you're taking 30 seconds rest or maybe a bit less, 400s at about 30-second ballpark. This evening I did 4 sets of 10 times 200 with 15 seconds rest in between my reps and then a bit longer in between the sets, taking 90 seconds between the sets. And this is something it's reasonably new to me, I'm experimenting with, but it meant that I could run at nearly 5K race pace, pretty much 5K race pace, but my heart rate is really nice and controlled. I've effectively got 7.5 minute reps where you couldn't really tell if I was doing 7.5 minute reps straight or if I was doing the 200 on, 15 seconds off in terms of a profile. And that will have a much more aerobic contribution versus if I'd done 200 reps of 30 seconds rest or 45 seconds rest or a minute rest. That's going to shift the balance much more towards the glycolytic. Of course, there's still going to be an aerobic response, but you're going to get more of that glycolytic contribution, which is maybe what you want, depends on what you're trying to train for. But if you're talking about heavy intensity domain stuff and you're doing shorter reps, you need to keep recovery short.
Yeah. And I guess then we've talked about like rep length, but a total duration for the session. I think we're probably both thinking like minimum of 30 minutes, just to get a decent sort of dose. I guess this is where you can accumulate a lot more work. So there probably is like a minimum amount of work that you want to do to actually like get that dose as well. At the same time, I probably wouldn't go much above like 45, 50 minutes unless it's really on the like down towards the LT1 end. Just because you're just going to be getting a lot of like musculoskeletal fatigue at that point. And in reality, I don't think you could really do like much more at close to LT2 than like 50 minutes, maybe 60 minutes if you're really well trained in a session. Like that's just really pushing it. You're just going to feel really cooked by the end of it.
Yeah, I guess if you went to try and do 10, if you're an elite athlete, doing 10 by a mile, 12 by a mile at half marathon race pace would be a really, really hard session. You're basically doing the whole distance of a half marathon at race pace with a bit of rest. That's going to feel very difficult. But if you're close to LT1, then maybe that's a bit more manageable. I've done 4 times 4 miles at marathon race pace, which is somewhere between LT1 and LT2, probably the midpoint really. And that's the hardest session I would do ever. But I can get through that. So that is closer to 80 minutes of work. If my maths is right there. I think I broadly agree with about 30 minute to 45, 50 minute range is good. And where the duration of a session is going to influence where you sit between LT1 and LT2. And probably that reflects what you're actually training for. The only addition I would say is that if you are doing those short reps of short recoveries, there is a higher neuromuscular cost. So although your lactate and heart rate might be fine, you're just running at much faster speeds. And so it does take a bit more out of you. So if you're doing like 75 seconds off 30 seconds rest, then maybe you want to start off with more like 20 minutes of work, and you should be able to get through that. If you're not getting through that, you're working too hard. But you don't necessarily need to jump straight into 30 minutes worth of, 30 times a minute off 20 seconds rest, for example. That would be quite a big session.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to maybe like final thing for me to add, with those shorter sessions, like it's not going to go amazingly well the first time. Like you're going to have to figure out the intensity and how you respond. And it might be, you need 20 seconds rather than 15 seconds recovery, but that still keeps the session really good. Or, you might find that you just set the, especially if you're doing it on like a treadmill, you just set the pace a bit too slow for the first 5 or 6 reps, but it's something to like learn over time. Once you get it, once you figure out what works for you, it's okay. But yeah, it's definitely one where, maybe go into the first one prepared to more be learning how to like do the session in the correct intensity sort of area than thinking about completely nailing the session. But I mean, that's part of it, isn't it? It's part of learning and growing as an athlete is not being afraid to get stuff slightly wrong, and get it slightly wrong with the intensity too low than too high, I think.
Exactly. And that's how I approach starting these sets of 200s on 15 seconds off. But I'm going to start an intensity, but I'm 95% confident is too slow that I can do. And then as the sets go on, I can increase the pace. You definitely want to, the preference is definitely to do that compared to starting off too fast and then actually having to really slow down. You've got so much fatigue in the system that you basically achieve not very much because you've just compromised the volume of a session. So we won't go into defining LT1 and LT2 today because that would just take another 10 minutes. And we did a whole podcast episode on that. So go back. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back to I think it's called Between Two Thresholds. I believe the episode is called. It's done quite well in the numbers. So people seem to like it. And in terms of also how you cap your duration, I would say that you should pay attention just to how hard it's feeling. If it's becoming, because threshold sessions can become 10 out of 10 if you just really push the volume, I would say, because a marathon is basically a threshold. At the end of a marathon, by threshold, I mean between LT1 and LT2, by the end of a marathon, you're at a 10 out of 10 and your lactate levels aren't going to be that high necessarily. So I would cap it at 7 out of 10 just to make sure that it's manageable. You can get through it. Maybe sometimes you're a little bit higher, but you shouldn't be doing threshold to exhaustion. I would say, and if you follow those guidelines that we've laid out, you shouldn't be hitting that sort of area. So that's heavy intensity domain. We did quickly say we're going to give some examples. You can just be as creative as you like with the threshold work. I mean, I like to keep it quite pure and just do sets of, or do fixed time reps. So 10 by 3 minutes, 5 by 6 minutes, 4 by 10 minutes, 5 by 8 minutes. That's what the athletes I coach get a lot of. But you can mix it up and you can do things like I do quite like 9 minutes, 2 by 6 minutes, 4 by 3 minutes, and you can just work a little bit faster as the session goes on. Heart rate will stay quite stable, but the paces will get faster because the rep duration is a bit shorter. And with the shorter sessions, like I said, 25 times 400, 20 times 400, 30 seconds rest. That would be a standard. I said I don't really like the 2-minute reps. I just sort of feel like it's not long enough for heart rate to get that high, but also doing short recoveries, it feels like you've not really recovered to go again. I don't know. That's sort of just probably personal preference.
I've not had good experience with them either. So yeah, I found the same. And yeah, I agree with the rep length. Like you're just taking the total time you want and finding a way that agrees with you about dividing them up. And I think that's where if your starting point is total time, then you're probably going to stick with time reps. especially if you're being guided by heart rate and you might not know exactly how long you're going to take to run a K or a mile. Once you roughly know, then it's a bit easier. But for me, like a mile rep is basically 6 minutes, so I'll just do 6 minutes instead because it's a bit cleaner.
It just
And
takes, I think it takes the pressure off in terms of you always, if you're doing Ks or miles, you always just want to hit a slightly faster split. Whereas if you're doing like timed reps, I'll often just have heart rate up. I don't have pace up at all. So I don't even know how fast I'm running. I'm just going off of effort and heart rate and lactate if I've got that as well. But it just stops you chasing times. Nice. Let's move on to severe intensity domain, which I think is an area I alluded to at the start, is where people get it wrong. And like the main purpose of this type of work is really to drive more cardiovascular adaptations. You are going to get metabolic responses as well. Like you're going to get a sort of a rise in lactate, and that is going to help you expose you to that stuff you're going to face on race day. When you're talking about a 5K, a 10K, 3K, whatever, you're going to get this rise in lactate throughout and improve your buffering capacity. And you're still going to get a threshold response. Like we said already, that a minute of severe intensity domain is going to just give you more signaling response than a minute of heavy domain training. But the difference is you can't do 30, 40, 50 minutes of work in the severe intensity domain without really cooking yourself, probably. So this is where I think it's even more important that you're smart with what you're doing.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like the wrong intensity sort of setting out can really derail these sessions, and that's the ones where either your pace rapidly slows across the session, or a 2-minute rest sort of becomes a 2.5-minute rest, becomes a 3.5-minute rest by the end. I think that's where you see these sort of going wrong. And I think it's probably worth, like, I think maybe the simplistic way to think about these is just, it's just running hard, it's just running at 5K pace. But actually there is quite a need to get the intensity quite in quite a narrow window, because it needs to be intense enough to get the VO2 response, but not so intense that it completely ruins the session because you're just working at too high a metabolic cost. So it is actually
Exactly.
quite hard. Whereas I think they're presented as just 5K pace, but actually that doesn't really accurately reflect what you're trying to do, and just sort of really undersells the need to be accurate.
Yeah, and they're harder to execute because you're not going to have a steady state. Every rep is going to feel a little bit harder. So if you get that wrong on your first rep, then that's going to have big knock-on consequences for the session. It's not like threshold sessions where they do get harder, but it's much more gradual, versus if you're doing 5 by a K, for example, at 5K race pace, you can feel that everyone is getting noticeably harder. I would say if I was doing 10 by a K at threshold, then I'm working a little bit harder at the end, but not that much harder than I was at the start. And I probably couldn't tell you if my RPE on the 3rd rep and the 8th rep are going to be very, very similar. Whereas that's not true in the severe intensity domain. I mean, the literature says that if we're after VO2 max adaptations, which is pretty much why I would prescribe severe intensity domain training, it is, and by that I mean above LT2, severe intensity domain above LT2, below VO2 max. Anyway, if you're looking for VO2 max adaptations, the literature says that you need to accumulate as much time as you can, or at least a meaningful amount of time above 90% of your VO2 max. So that is what you're trying to achieve there. And you could probably use as a proxy like 92% of heart rate max, 90% of heart rate max, that sort of ballpark. In terms of, if you're just looking at heart rate alone, there's a pretty good relationship between heart rate and VO2. So you don't need to be at max heart rate, but you need to be getting closer to that. So you want to design sessions that are going to enable you to accumulate a good amount of time at above 90% of your VO2 max, or 92% of your max heart rate. And that's an example of 10 by 400 off a minute is just not a good way of doing it, because you never actually spend that much time with a high heart rate. And you're breathing really hard, and people interpret that as, I must be near my VO2 max because I'm breathing really hard. But your breathing rate isn't driven by your oxygen consumption. It's driven by how much CO2 you're producing, which is due to how much lactate you're producing. Basically, lactate gets buffered in the blood. And a byproduct of that is carbon dioxide. The amount of carbon dioxide in your blood drives your respiratory rate. That's why at the end of 400 meters, people are absolutely gassed. Even after 200 meters, you see those sprinters, they're breathing really hard. They're nowhere near their VO2 max, but they are breathing pretty much maximally. So, as I said, you want to design these sessions where you can accumulate quite a few minutes above 92% of heart rate max. And there's two ways you can go about it, a bit like in the threshold sessions. You can either do short intervals or long intervals. Do you want to, I've just talked for ages. I'm going to pass it over to you now, Owain.
Yeah, so again, I mean, you've sort of gone with a similar categorization of long and short, but yeah, longer intervals probably above 3 minutes. Again, similar thinking, like below 2 minutes, probably not long enough to get that heart rate response. And to, if we were measuring VO2, not long enough to see that sort of VO2 kinetics and the rising oxygen cost, and the sort of on kinetic response as well. That's not going to be long enough. So yeah, longer reps, 8 minutes is probably, 8 minutes is going to be the most that you're going to be able to do.
I was what do I put the upper range at on the notes that we've got here? And I put 3 to 8 minutes, and I only did 3 by 8 minutes because of that. Steven Seiler loves the 4 by 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about 10K pace as the intensity you're working at, you could just about do 8-minute reps at 10K pace, I would say. But I would very rarely prescribe 4 by 8 minutes just because I think that is really, really hard.
Yeah, I think some of these come from like where they've had the participants on bikes, and I don't know, it feels just a bit easier to, the last interval, you're maybe like really cooked by the end of it, and you're like, you're just cooked on the bike. Whereas if you're running and you're like collapsing over the line, that probably means you've gone a bit too hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. Like just thinking that even just getting people to do that every week in a study, they're probably not going to come back after the first week. Whereas I think on a bike, there's maybe a bit more propensity to do it. I think there's also some stuff about like the VO2 kinetic response on a bike as well that maybe plays a part. But anyway, I'd probably in reality like 6 minutes. Is because in reality that's probably like but a mile, right? And like you do 3 or 4 by a mile above sort of LT2. That's quite a big session. So I think just practically probably 6 minutes is maybe the sort of upper end of what you'd want to do.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the shorter intervals, anywhere from 15 to 60 seconds. And again, this is I think for the longer intervals, the recoveries are really important, like more important than the heavy domain stuff. But in the short intervals, especially, like you just got to keep your heart rate up. Again, it's probably almost more like a neuromuscular like break than a like looking at your heart rate, I think. And there's going to be some lag with the heart rate. So your heart rates, if you're doing like 30-30s or 30-15s, so 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off, like your heart rate is still going to be high for the first 5 seconds of the recovery, and it's probably going to be a bit lower for the first 5 to 10 seconds of the on, but there's sort of like that delayed response going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the recovery for the longer reps, actually more recovery is typically better. And I think this is a mistake people make. They go, right, I'm going to do 6 by a mile at 10K race pace and we take a minute, because that's what we do. We always take a minute recovery. But that is going to compromise the quality of the session, because heart rate is going to rise really quickly. By 90 seconds, 2 minutes in, it's going to be a really high level. And then because you're doing longer reps, it's going to sit there for quite a few minutes of time. If you're doing 6 minute reps, then 2 minutes for it to get up to a high level, 4 minutes where you're operating pretty close to your VO2 max, or above 90% of your VO2 max at least. And then you don't need the short recoveries to keep that VO2 upregulated. You could take 2 or 3 minutes because it's going to, you're not after switching on those VO2 kinetics as quickly as you can for your next rep. You're going to accumulate a lot of time anyway. So I would prefer to take a bit more recovery. Now, there's probably a limit. You don't want to be taking 5 minutes between reps necessarily, because eventually that will slow down your VO2 kinetics, and just sessions take a long time. Then you end up being a sprinter, don't you? But in the shorter intervals, yeah, like we were saying for the threshold stuff, that's when it becomes important, because giving that example again of a 10 by 400, 10 by 400 could be a good VO2 max session, but you need to keep recoveries short to keep that VO2 up the whole time.
Yeah. That's sort of probably the priority with the session. Maybe even more so than paces, right? Is keeping your heart rate high for as long as possible during the session, as long as possible up to a certain duration. You don't want it to be high beyond that, because you're going to really really feel it for the days after if you do that.
Yeah.
I think also something you mentioned in the notes, which I think is definitely worth mentioning, is like having a really good warm up and doing some priming before these. Because if you're doing 3 or 4 reps and your first one feels rubbish and isn't as good because you've just jogged for 10 minutes and then gone straight into it, like that's going to compromise quite a big amount of the session. It's probably going to make the whole session feel a bit rubbish. Whereas if you do some priming, which is running at above, sort of between LT1 and LT2, for a few minutes before, that's just going to speed up the VO2 response and the heart rate response. There's a whole episode on priming if you want to listen to us talk about that. But I think that's a really good point as well. I think that's, again, probably as important as like the session design is the execution, and doing things like that. You can get away with it with the threshold sessions, but
threshold sessions, I will just jog and then start them and use the first couple of, if the first couple of reps feel rubbish, that's fine. But with these, say you are doing 6 by a mile at 10k race pace, then if you do that, you don't prime. If you don't do any priming, you've not done a full warm up, you're only going to get above LT2 heart rate just about at the end of that first mile. So you've basically wasted a rep, because VO2 is just not going to be that high after the first one. It takes a bit of time for that aerobic system to really rev up. But if you do, right, I'm going to do a K, let's say I'm going to do a 3-minute priming at half marathon pace, then you're closing that gap. You're having a ladder in terms of intensity, going from easy running, you do the 3 minutes at half marathon effort or a bit faster, that's going to get your heart rate up towards LT2. And then when you do that second rep, you're going to be spending a good amount of time above 90% of your VO2 max for that first rep. And then you're just getting actually what ends up being 20%, 25% of a session, depending on how many reps you're doing, more specific stimulus from the workout.
Yeah, agreed. In terms of like session duration for these, I think probably 20, 25 minutes, maybe tops. Would you say?
I sort of think 15 to 30. Is 30 being probably the absolute limit, and maybe a bit too much for some people.
Yeah. I think actually quite like to. Too long.
What's that?
I think for most 30 is probably too long.
Yeah, potentially. And I would start off with shorter durations. Yeah. But I think a nice way to introduce yourself to this sort of work is, and how often I do it with my athletes, is I will get them to do some threshold stuff first. They might do 4 by 5 minutes threshold, and then 4 by 3 minutes more VO2 max type intensity in this severe intensity domain. So that way they've got the priming in by doing some threshold work. They've warmed up the neuromuscular system really well. They're still getting a good volume session in, but then they're hitting some more intensity at the end. And I think that works quite well. It doesn't need to be a pure stimulus with just doing VO2 max today. Because you end up with just really short sessions. And over time, I think that does have a knock-on effect for your fitness. But it's something to play around with.
Yeah. And then some session examples. I reckon, I know we joke about it, but 4 by 4 minutes is probably an okay place to start on the lower end. and then maybe you're looking at like K reps, so maybe 5 or 6 by a K, 3 to 5 by a mile maybe as well on the sort of longer end.
Yeah, yeah, I think they're all good ones. I think it's for short reps, but less common maybe, or less easily understood. I think breaking it up into sets for this helps. It just makes you sure you can keep the quality high and hit the speeds you need to really drive up that VO2. So I think things like 4 sets of 400s, 20 seconds rest between reps and 2 or 3 minutes between sets, that sort of thing. Or if you're doing 200s, I mean, there's that famous bike session, which is, I'd say famous in our world probably. They do 3 times 13 reps of 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off. And that's one that's been demonstrated in cyclists, at least, to have a really good VO2 response, and that VO2 just goes up for the whole duration, which basically works out as about 10 minutes of work in total. So that's the sort of stuff I would suggest with the shorter sessions. That's probably an extreme example. I wouldn't start with 3 times 13 times 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off.
And I think some of that comes into where you can do 2 hours of cycling before you do that, can't you? Whereas you can't do 2 hours of running.
No. The neuromuscular, there are neuromuscular differences between running and cycling. You can probably just do a bit more on the cycling. But 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off is not a good way to do it. But keeping it, I would maybe start with 2 sets of 8 and then maybe progressing up to 3 or 4 sets of 8 if you're finding you're coping with that okay.
Yeah. Should we quickly run through the extreme domain?
This will take no time at all, I think. I say so. Extreme domain above VO2 max. I sprinting, speed, endurance work was typically how I describe it in lay person's terms, but effectively it's the intensity that if you run at that to exhaustion, you won't hit VO2 max. You'll be limited by your peripheral fatigue. So high lactate, not the lactate itself, but the acidity associated with it, which is going to cause fatigue before you get to VO2 max. So I sort of think of it as 800 meter pace and faster. You probably are just about a VO2 max at the end of an 800 meters, depending upon how good you are. I.e., if you're running it in 1 minute 40, maybe you're not quite at VO2 max at the end. If you're running it in 2.5 minutes, then you will be at VO2 max at the end. So there, in terms of race paces, that's how I would classify it, and all the way up to maximal sprint speed. But we've just said in the podcast episode on this that it's risky stuff, depending on how well you do it. But you can make it less risky by giving yourself generous recoveries. And you should always have long recoveries when you're doing this kind of work, because you're trying to promote neuromuscular adaptations. You want to reach really high velocities to either increase maximal sprint speeds or to just develop that neuromuscular system, that running technique. And so you want quality to be really, really high. And this is why I joked earlier about sprinters taking forever to do their sessions, but they will do like 5 times 60 meters and take 10 minutes rest in between each one if they are really, really going for it, I would say. But they've also got systems that are built that allow them to produce really, really high lactate levels, and they need more recovery. Someone like me doesn't need 10 minutes between a 60-meter sprint. I could hit a PB and then go again in 2 minutes time, a minute's time probably. It just wouldn't be very fast.
Yeah. It's this is things like strides, isn't it, for us? In reality, maybe a bit more formalized than just strides. Like maybe like some of the stuff you're doing with like 100 meter, still calling it strides, but you're a bit more formalized than my sort of 4 by 15-ish seconds up a hill. But in terms of the recovery, that's where, like, for me, I'm just walking back down the hill, and it's, a minute, if not a little bit longer. So that's a 4-to-1 work to rest to work ratio. So it's, and that's just, I'm walking down to the bottom, and then I'm like, well, I might as well go again. I could probably stand there for another minute. And it doesn't compromise anything about the stride, me taking another minute. That's maybe the key point, isn't it? That whereas the VO2 max session, if you stand there for an extra minute, that's going to probably like really impact the rep. Whereas for strides, it's not really going to impact.
Yeah, you just want as long enough recovery as you need to maintain the quality. And if you end up running at more like 1500-meter race pace, you just can't maintain those speeds, then it's time to stop a session.
Yeah.
And next time, give yourself more rest. And I guess a little goes a long way. You don't need to be doing really high volumes of this stuff. You don't want to develop lots of fatigue, because then you are just going to risk injury, and also just not what you want out of it. And this is definitely more for more middle distance athletes, because if you are training for the 8, the 15, even like the 3K, 5K, 10K, if you're world class, you need to be able to close the last 400 meters. If you're a guy, you need to be running low 50 seconds. If you can't do that, then you're going to not be successful, certainly in championship events. And that probably means running a sub 50 second 400 when you're fresh and ready to go. So that is, you need those qualities if you're a middle distance athlete or competing in championships. And to a certain extent, you're born with it, but you can still train and get better at closing speeds, maximal sprint speed. And I think just as a neuromuscular stimulus for running economy, making marathon pace feel more submaximal, it is a useful tool to add in. It's not going to be the thing that changes you from a 3-hour marathon runner into a 2.5-hour marathon runner, but maybe it makes a small difference. Yeah.
And I think just going back to your point about calling it quits when you start to feel that fatigue, I think that would be my like sort of main points is, like less is more. Like if you do your fourth stride and you feel like you're tiring quite a lot, just stop then. And definitely not something to be rushed. Like this isn't something where if you have like 3 extra minutes at the end of your run, you could maybe fit something in. Like maybe you'll do this. Like it's just one where if you have the luxury of 10 minutes extra at the end of a run, like add it in, but don't rush to add it in as well.
It's giving yourself a time to do it properly. And make sure another one where you want to be warmed up and ready to go. Just don't jump into sprinting flat out at the end of your runs. Probably starting with hills is a safer way to do it. It just reduces the load on your body a little bit. But I think that's about wrapped up, to be honest. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure we'll get some comments. Like, obviously, let us know if we've missed anything. This series may continue.
It's sort of evolving as it goes along. We were just saying before we started recording that we thought this might be a month, and starting in January, and we're now in March recording this. So, it's sort of been driven by a lot by feedback from you guys, to be honest. This one especially was very much, we got quite a few questions. So how should we be designing the sessions? What should they look like? Give us some examples. I guess to add to that last one there, extreme intensity domain, we didn't give any examples of that. But in terms of rep length, for most endurance athletes, under 15 seconds, I think that's max what you want. If you are a middle distance athlete, you're going to be doing at some point race specific work where you're doing 300 meter reps, maybe a max of 400 meter reps at 800 meter race pace, because you really do need to drive that buffering capacity. I've seen some horrible sessions from 800 meter athletes and coaches, like 2x400 or 5 minutes rest, something like that. Absolutely horrible. But in general, I think for the population who generally listen to this podcast, I've been doing 10 by 15 seconds, and actually I'm probably running that closer to 1500 meter 3K race pace, to be honest. So it probably doesn't even fall into this extreme intensity domain category. I think 10-second reps are generally long enough, and you don't want to be doing more than 5 or 6, really.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. Cool. Should we leave it there for now?
Yeah, leave it there for now. We'll see where we go next from the feedback from this episode. Maybe we've done a crap job of me to re-explain some things or dig a bit deeper into research.
Yeah.
But I
I think
think
the only other thing we sort of mentioned it was like, don't be afraid for the first or second or third attempt to not go perfectly. Like you learn. Um, yeah, yeah. As long as
absolutely.
as long as you're ticking the rough goal for the session, like yeah, the execution might not be perfect, but like learn and reflect from it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have that with a lot of the athletes who I start coaching transition to using heart rate much more, and they go to pace their first session off of by heart rate instead of pace, and they just don't get it right. Like 90% of the time, they start out too fast and have to slow down. That's the big one, I would say. Or they try and get their heart rate up as quickly as possible in the first rep, or trying to hit like the top of the ceiling, the top of the range, that LT2 heart rate on their threshold sessions in the first rep, and then we're just slowing every consecutive rep. But it is just like you do that a couple of times and then you learn. So it is. Just like you said, reflecting on what you've done. Did you execute it well? Next time, making those adjustments.
Yeah, agree. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you for listening, and thanks for the comments. And let us know what you think about this one. Catch everyone next time.